Imagine this. You're walking through a crowded city square at night. A glowing silver sphere sits on a pedestal, polished and futuristic, reflecting the neon around it. People are lining up, waiting for their turn. A voice whispers, "Look into the orb, let it scan your eyes, and receive your share of the future." It sounds simple, even exciting. Free money, free access, a digital key to a promised tomorrow. But as you step closer, something feels wrong. The device isn't just looking, it's recording. It's pulling secrets from inside your very identity. And you ask yourself, what will you really be giving away in exchange for what you receive? Welcome to Black Thread Mysteries, where we unravel the hidden, the unspoken, and the shadows behind modern innovation. Tonight, we dive into the chilling controversy of Worldcoin's Orb, a device born from grand ambition but cloaked in suspicion. What began as a vision of universal digital equality has instead stirred questions of privacy, control, and power on a scale the world may not yet be ready for. The idea seems irresistible. A universal digital currency, not bound to governments or banks, available to every single person alive. The founders of Worldcoin claimed this was humanity's chance to share in a new economic system, to prove human uniqueness in an age where artificial intelligence threatens to drown out real people. The orb, a sleek sphere the size of a basketball, was the gatekeeper to this dream. You step up, it scans your iris, and in exchange, you receive a world ID and a share of tokens. A fair trade, perhaps, but once the excitement fades, deeper questions remain. How safe is a scan of your eyes? Can cryptographic codes truly protect something as personal as your identity? And most hauntingly, what happens if such data is ever misused? From the very first demonstrations, people were split. Some saw a revolution. Others saw surveillance disguised as opportunity. News footage showed crowds in marketplaces, college campuses, even rural towns, gathering around these mysterious devices. Interviews revealed excitement, confusion, and unease. While the official line claimed that no raw biometric images were stored, only mathematical hashes, critics argued that once you invite a machine to capture your iris, you can never be fully certain who else holds a copy or how it might be used tomorrow. This is not a fictional tale. It is unfolding now across cities and nations with real consequences. Regulators in Europe, Africa, and beyond are asking whether Worldcoin is offering progress or merely harvesting trust from populations too desperate to question the trade. In the shimmering light of the orb lies both hope and fear, the possibility of inclusion and the shadow of control. This investigation is for educational and documentary purposes only. We present evidence, reports, and expert concerns as they exist publicly. This is not financial or legal advice. Tonight, we follow the thread of Worldcoin, its origins, its promises, the global rollout, and the unease that surrounds it. Let's begin. To understand how the orb appeared in public squares and markets, we need to rewind to its origin story. Worldcoin was not conceived in secrecy, but in Silicon Valley's bold environment, where visions often blur the line between progress and peril. In 2020, Sam Altman, already known globally as the CEO of OpenAI, teamed up with Alex Blania, a young German physicist fascinated with systems that could operate on a planetary scale. Their shared ambition was audacious: build a new global digital currency, distributed equally to every person alive, not tied to governments, not limited by borders, but universal. The obstacle was one of identity. In a digital world dominated by bots, deepfakes, and fraud, how could you prove someone online was truly human? Traditional systems, passwords, ID cards, even fingerprints, were too easy to forge. Altman and Blania proposed a radical solution: use the most unique biometric marker of all, the iris. From this idea came the orb, a metallic sphere that looked like a prop from a science fiction film. About the size of a basketball, smooth and polished, it was designed to gaze into your eyes and translate your iris into a cryptographic code. This code, they said, was not a photograph or a stored image, but an encrypted hash, mathematical, untraceable, impossible to replicate. That hash became the key to a world ID. With this identity, you could prove you were human anywhere online, and crucially, you would be eligible to claim your share of Worldcoin tokens. The vision was not merely financial. Altman spoke openly about AI's rise, predicting a future where machines might outperform humans in many areas. In that scenario, a universal digital income might be necessary, and Worldcoin could be the infrastructure to deliver it. It was not just a currency, it was a shield against a coming storm. The Orb's debut was deliberately theatrical. Teams of operators carried them into cities around the globe: Kenya, India, Chile, Portugal. Crowds gathered in markets, campuses, and metro stations. For some, the promise of free cryptocurrency was enough to queue for hours. For others, the Orb's polished surface felt like a portal to the unknown. Some smiled as they received their tokens, holding their phones high as proof. Others walked away uneasy, wondering what invisible strings were attached to the scan they had just given. Supporters argued that this was the dawn of financial equality, a way to include billions of people excluded from traditional banking. Yet the questions began immediately. Could the iris hash ever be reversed into a recognizable eye pattern? What legal safeguards prevented misuse? Who truly owned the World ID? Was it yours? Or was it held in trust by Worldcoin's network of servers? The answers, even in the early days, were never simple. This was the foundation of the Orb controversy. A utopian dream launched on the back of a biometric gamble. And as more people lined up to stare into its glowing eye, the whispers of doubt began to spread louder than the promises. The rollout of the Orb was unlike anything the financial world had seen before. Instead of sleek press events in San Francisco or New York, Worldcoin chose a different stage. Teams appeared in marketplaces of Nairobi, plazas of Santiago, campuses in Bangalore, and metro stations in Lisbon. Wherever the Orb arrived, it drew a crowd. A line would form, curious eyes watching as each participant stepped forward, placed their face close to the polished surface, and waited for the scan. Moments later, phones buzzed with confirmation. World ID created, tokens assigned. It felt futuristic, almost ceremonial, as if each person had crossed into a new digital realm. Media coverage was swift. Headlines praised the boldness of a project attempting to give financial tools to the unbanked, those often excluded from the modern economy. Photographs of smiling participants circulated online, showing students and vendors holding up their phones with gleaming pride. To many, it looked like inclusion finally made tangible. But behind the excitement, questions brewed. Journalists began probing the details. How exactly was iris data stored? Could it ever be misused? What would stop authoritarian governments from demanding access to these identities? Privacy advocates sounded alarms. Reports from early test sites revealed that participants were often unclear on what they were consenting to. Some lined up simply for the promise of free cryptocurrency, with little understanding of how their biometric data might be used in the future. Others said they felt pressured. Orb operators would appear in poorer neighborhoods, offering tokens as incentives, turning vulnerable populations into the first wave of test subjects. Critics argued that while the technology was being marketed as empowering, it was disproportionately tested on communities with fewer safeguards and weaker regulatory oversight. Governments, too, began to take notice. In Europe, regulators questioned whether the Orb complied with strict data protection laws. In Kenya, officials abruptly suspended operations, citing concerns about security and exploitation. In India, the project ran into hesitation, as legal frameworks for biometric data were still under debate. Every launch seemed to spark both fascination and unease, fueling the mystery further. Meanwhile, Worldcoin insisted that it was safe. Company spokespeople repeated the same assurances: no raw images stored, only mathematical hashes, no way to reverse engineer an iris from the code, no control over your identity beyond your consent. They framed the orb as a passport for the digital age, one that could prove humanity in a sea of artificial intelligence. But the message, however carefully delivered, did not silence doubt. The more orbs appeared, the more people questioned whether they were witnessing the start of a revolution or the quiet birth of a surveillance network disguised as progress. The early rollout left the world divided. For some, the orb was hope made real. For others, it was a glowing warning sign that technology and trust were colliding in ways we might not fully understand, until it was too late. By the time thousands of people had already gazed into the orb, the debate shifted from curiosity to confrontation. Privacy experts around the world began dissecting Worldcoin's promises, searching for cracks in the carefully polished surface. The company insisted that no actual eye images were stored, that each iris scan was converted into a one-way hash, a code so secure it could never be reconstructed into the original pattern. But critics pointed out an uncomfortable truth. Once you surrender biometric data, you can never truly take it back. Passwords can be reset, bank cards can be canceled, but your iris, it is forever. Investigative journalists began interviewing participants in multiple countries, and the stories were troubling. Many admitted they had no idea what they had agreed to. Consent forms were rushed, explanations vague, and operators sometimes unable to answer questions beyond the basics. In regions with limited digital literacy, participants often walked away with tokens without fully understanding the trade they had just made. To skeptics, this was not democratization. It was exploitation, hidden under the glow of futuristic design. Technologists also weighed in. While the mathematics behind the orb's cryptography was sophisticated, no system is beyond risk. What if hackers targeted Worldcoin's servers? What if the hashes, despite assurances, could be cross-referenced with other biometric databases? Security researchers warned of a future where one breach could expose millions of identities, permanently tying people's physical selves to digital networks they never agreed to join. Even if the company's intentions were pure, history has shown how data, once collected, has a tendency to find new purposes, sometimes sinister. The symbolism of the orb itself only deepened suspicion. Its reflective shell, its almost ritualistic scanning process, its promise of access through submission, all of it felt less like technology and more like initiation. Social media users began comparing it to dystopian fiction, a glowing eye that watches, records, and decides your worth. Memes emerged, blending the orb with imagery of surveillance states and corporate control. Beneath the jokes, though, was a real unease. The idea that one device, controlled by one company, could become the gatekeeper of global identity was too close to the nightmares of centralized power. Worldcoin's leadership responded with calm confidence, reiterating that their mission was inclusion, not domination. They invited audits, published white papers, and held interviews emphasizing transparency. But even as they spoke, regulators grew louder. Data protection agencies in Germany and the UK launched investigations. Kenyan authorities declared the project suspended until further notice. In each case, the central issue was the same. Can any organization, no matter how well-intentioned, be trusted to handle the most personal form of human data? By now, the orb was no longer just a shiny device. It had become a symbol of a larger battle, the clash between utopian visions of a borderless economy and the stark realities of privacy, exploitation, and control. And as more voices joined the debate, one question echoed louder than all others. Was Worldcoin offering humanity a gift or demanding its soul in return? By the time Worldcoin had deployed dozens of orbs across multiple continents, the project's public perception began to shift. Initial curiosity and excitement gave way to scrutiny and skepticism. News outlets highlighted the growing unease among privacy advocates, human rights organizations, and government regulators. The question was no longer about the potential of a universal currency. It was about whether humanity had inadvertently handed a single company the keys to its most intimate biometric data. In Europe, the story hit the headlines fast. Data protection agencies in Germany, France, and the UK warned that Worldcoin might be in violation of strict privacy laws. Officials cited concerns about consent, the permanence of iris scans, and the potential for data misuse. In Germany, an investigation was launched to ensure that the company's systems could not be reverse-engineered or exploited. Meanwhile, France issued formal warnings, demanding transparency about data storage and cross-border transmission. Regulators emphasized that no matter the technical assurances, the very act of collecting irises without robust safeguards could constitute a breach of personal rights. Africa, too, became a focal point of the controversy. Kenya, which had welcomed initial Worldcoin tests with curiosity, abruptly suspended operations after human rights groups reported that vulnerable communities were being incentivized to submit biometric data in exchange for tokens. Critics argued that what was marketed as financial inclusion risked turning into coercion. People with limited access to banking or digital infrastructure were stepping into lines, often unaware of the permanent digital footprints they were leaving behind. The backlash was immediate. Local media portrayed the orb as a tool of exploitation disguised as innovation. Even in countries where operations continued, public trust grew. Online forums, social media, and investigative blogs dissected each aspect of the orb. People debated the security of cryptographic hashes, the centralization of data storage, and the possibility of future misuse by corporations or governments. The conversation shifted from financial empowerment to existential risk. Could a device designed to verify human identity become a tool of surveillance, control, or exclusion? For some, the orb was no longer a shiny technological marvel. It was a warning that progress often comes at a hidden cost. Worldcoin's founders responded swiftly. Public statements emphasized transparency, audits, and legal compliance. They repeated the mantra that no iris images were stored, that hashes were mathematically irreversible, and that individuals retained control of their world IDs. Yet, the reassurances did little to quell growing suspicion. The more regulators intervened, the more people questioned whether even the most well-intentioned systems could remain safe in a world hungry for data. By the end of this phase, the orb had become both a promise and a paradox. It offered financial access to millions, yet it also highlighted the fragility of trust in an increasingly digital age. As governments, activists, and citizens collided over the technology, Worldcoin's dream of a borderless economy was no longer just about money. It was about power, ethics, and the very definition of digital humanity. By now, the orb was no longer just a technological novelty. It had become a mirror reflecting humanity's fears. Social media exploded with images and videos, people laughing nervously as they approached the metallic sphere, screens glowing with confirmation messages, and viral posts dissecting every detail. Online, the discussion went far beyond currency or convenience. The question on everyone's mind became, what does it mean to prove that you are human? For some, the orb represented progress. It was a bridge to a new economy, a way for billions to claim a stake in the digital future. But for others, it was deeply unsettling. A device that scans the eye and stores cryptographic proof of your identity is not just a tool, it is a statement. It declares that human uniqueness is something that can be quantified, verified, and controlled. Philosophers, ethicists, and tech critics weighed in, warning that such systems could redefine autonomy. When access to services, financial opportunities, or even social participation depends on submitting to a device, Who truly holds the power? The controversy intensified as hackers and digital security experts began analyzing publicly available information about the orb. Could a breach expose millions of people permanently tied to a single network? Could governments or corporations coerce participation in the future? Speculation ran wild, and online communities debated fiercely. Memes, dramatic illustrations, and conspiracy theories spread, blending humor with unease. The orb had become a symbol, a glowing sentinel representing both inclusion and the chilling possibility of surveillance. Amid the speculation, a new layer of paranoia emerged, cultural and psychological. Some saw the orb as a ritualistic object, its reflective surface, quiet hum, and glowing scan evoking centuries-old fears of being watched or judged. It was no longer just technology. It had become mythic, almost spiritual. Forums debated whether its presence in poorer regions constituted ethical overreach. Others asked if participation subtly conditioned humanity to accept constant verification, subtly eroding privacy norms across generations. And here's where you, the viewer, come in. Have you seen or heard of orbs in your city, school, or workplace? Do you believe the promise of financial inclusion outweighs the privacy risks? Or does this technology cross a line you cannot ignore? Comment your location, experiences, or theories down below. Let's map the spread of this phenomenon together. Every story shared adds another piece to this unfolding puzzle. As the debate raged online and offline, one truth became undeniable. The orb had changed more than currency distribution. It had forced society to confront fundamental questions about identity, trust, and the balance between empowerment and control. What began as a simple idea, a way to give digital tokens to anyone proving they are human, had become a global ethical dilemma, leaving millions unsure if they were participants, witnesses, or pawns in a new experiment. As the orb spread across countries and communities, the discussion evolved from simple skepticism to profound ethical questioning. What does it mean to have your humanity quantified, reduced to a digital code scanned by a glowing machine? Philosophers and ethicists began framing it as more than technology. It was a mirror reflecting society's willingness to trade privacy for perceived opportunity. If proving your identity becomes a prerequisite for participation in the digital economy, then autonomy and freedom subtly shift into new territory, controlled by those who design and operate the system. Communities that had embraced the orb began to notice subtle shifts in behavior. People who previously had little contact with financial systems were now tied to a global network, tracked via the hashes generated from their eyes. Even if these hashes were theoretically secure, the psychological impact was undeniable. Trust was being rerouted from familiar institutions to a device, a company, and a digital ledger. Some researchers warned that over time, society could begin to accept this form of verification as normal, eroding natural privacy expectations without fully understanding the consequences. Journalists and analysts explored another facet, the centralization of trust. While Worldcoin argued that the orb decentralized currency distribution, critics pointed out that the identity verification process itself was concentrated in the hands of a single entity. One company could determine who qualifies as human in the digital world, who can claim access to tokens, and who may be excluded due to error or bias. In this way, a device designed to empower could simultaneously create new forms of control and inequality, invisible yet potent. Cultural and global implications further complicated the debate. In developing regions, the orb often arrived as a symbol of opportunity, free tokens, access to digital economies, and inclusion in emerging technologies. Yet in wealthier countries, the conversation shifted toward ethics, security, and potential dystopian futures. This duality created tension. What is empowerment to some can be coercion to others. Media coverage reflected this clash, highlighting the paradox of a technology that could be simultaneously liberating and unsettling. Even legal frameworks struggled to keep pace. Laws protecting biometric data, digital identity, and privacy were inconsistent across borders, leaving gaps that could be exploited. Governments scrambled to assess whether consent was truly informed, whether the promises of security held, and whether the rapid adoption of orbs could outpace regulatory oversight. Ethical debates merged with practical concerns. In a world where AI and technology advance faster than legislation, can society trust a single company to safeguard identity on a global scale? The orb at this point had transcended its original purpose. It was no longer simply a tool for distributing tokens, it was a philosophical question in metallic form. Each iris scan, each cryptographic hash, each world ID became part of a larger story about what it means to be human in a world where technology can quantify, verify, and surveil. And as millions participated, watched, or debated from a distance, one truth became stark. The orb was less about currency than it was about the fragile boundary between empowerment and control, between freedom and digital subjugation. As Worldcoin's orb became more widespread, whispers of control and manipulation began to dominate conversations. Critics argued that the device was more than a tool for distributing digital tokens. It was a mechanism that could shape behavior, enforce compliance, and subtly normalize surveillance. Each person who stepped forward and consented to the scan added a small piece to a vast, interconnected network. A network controlled by a single company, operating globally, and collecting data in ways that were theoretically secure, but ultimately centralized. Analysts warned of unintended consequences. The orb might be marketed as empowering, yet it also had the potential to create dependency. In regions where access to digital currency became linked to the orb, individuals could find themselves compelled to participate, whether out of financial need or social pressure. The very promise of inclusion began to feel like subtle coercion. Scholars drew parallels to historical technologies that were adopted rapidly without full consideration of their societal impact, from early industrial machinery to biometric systems used in authoritarian regimes. The difference here was immediacy. The orb operated in real time, scanning, verifying, and recording identities on a planetary scale. Social dynamics were also affected. Communities that embraced the orb saw new social hierarchies emerge. Those with verified world IDs gained credibility and access, while others remained outside the system. Trust, once local and personal, was redirected to a digital authority. Philosophers and sociologists debated whether this shift represented progress or peril. Was humanity stepping into a more organized global economy, or was it surrendering autonomy in ways that might never be reversed? Global media amplified the concerns. Investigative pieces highlighted cases where individuals felt pressured to scan their irises, raising ethical questions about consent, coercion, and the power imbalance inherent in the system. Comparisons emerged to dystopian literature. A world in which personal identity became a commodity, verified and validated by glowing machines. Even supporters acknowledged that despite good intentions, the orb carried risks that could ripple across generations. Meanwhile, Worldcoin maintained that its mission was altruistic. Public statements emphasized security, transparency, and a vision of digital equality. They framed the orb as a step toward universal financial inclusion, a shield against automation-driven economic displacement. Yet the narrative of empowerment was complicated by the very real possibility that a single entity controlling verification on a global scale could become a gatekeeper, not merely of currency, but of trust, access, and social participation. As the controversy unfolded, one lesson became clear. The orb was not simply a device. It was a societal experiment, testing the limits of trust, ethics, and the human appetite for convenience. Every scan, every hash, and every world ID represented a choice, sometimes conscious, sometimes coerced, about how much control individuals were willing to cede in exchange for opportunity. And in a world racing toward digital futures, the orb had become a stark symbol. The boundary between empowerment and subjugation is thinner than most realize. And sometimes, shining technology masks the shadows of control. As Worldcoin continued to expand, the whispers of unease grew louder, evolving into full-blown tension. Security researchers began probing the orb's software and network architecture, raising alarms about potential vulnerabilities. Could a determined hacker extract millions of biometric hashes? Could a breach, even theoretical, create irreversible consequences, permanently linking people's physical identities to a network they never fully controlled? Every glowing orb, once seen as a beacon of inclusion, now cast shadows of doubt, hinting at dystopian futures where digital identity might be exploited for profit or power. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Users discussed the implications of centralized biometric verification on a global scale. Some imagined scenarios where governments or rogue actors might coerce participation or manipulate access to services. Could future societies condition citizens to comply with mandatory scanning, trading personal privacy for economic survival? The questions were no longer academic. They were tangible fears emerging from the intersection of ambition, technology, and human behavior. The media amplified these concerns, highlighting cases of participants expressing discomfort or regret. Journalists documented how orbs were often introduced in high-density, lower-income areas, emphasizing access to tokens over informed consent. Social networks overflowed with discussions, memes, and viral imagery portraying orbs as glowing eyes watching humanity. Even supporters of Worldcoin acknowledged that the optics were concerning. A single company holding verification of millions of humans' identities is a profound responsibility, one that invites scrutiny, criticism, and even fear. Technologists and ethicists alike pointed out another risk: cascading errors. What if a glitch invalidated thousands of world IDs, restricting access to services or digital assets? What if hashes, despite being encrypted, were ever matched with other databases? The potential for abuse, even inadvertently, created a sense of systemic fragility. The orb was no longer just a tool for financial inclusion. It had become a high-stakes experiment with global implications. Meanwhile, Worldcoin's founders continued to defend their vision. Public statements emphasized security audits, encrypted storage, and transparency in operations. They portrayed the orb as a shield against inequality, a device designed to empower, not control. Yet, for every reassurance, 1,000 questions lingered about consent, coercion, and the unforeseen consequences of centralizing proof of humanity. The tension between idealistic vision and practical risk became impossible to ignore. As the world grappled with these questions, the orb stood as a symbol of both possibility and peril. What began as a groundbreaking initiative to distribute digital currency had evolved into a societal mirror, reflecting human ambition, vulnerability, and the complex intersection of technology and ethics. For participants, regulators, and observers alike, one thought persisted. In this brave new digital frontier, every scan carries weight, every hash holds meaning, and every glowing orb silently observes the fragile balance between empowerment and control. As the orb controversy continues to ripple across the globe, one reality becomes undeniable. Worldcoin has forced humanity to confront a future where technology and identity are inseparable. What began as a bold vision for a universal currency has evolved into a profound debate about control, trust, and the limits of human autonomy. Each iris scan, each cryptographic hash, each claimed world ID serves as a reminder that in the digital age, participation comes with questions we may not yet fully understand. The future of this technology remains uncertain. Regulators are scrutinizing operations, privacy advocates continue to raise alarms, and citizens around the world grapple with the ethical implications of submitting their biometric data. Yet the orb has also sparked imagination. Supporters see the potential for financial inclusion on a scale never before possible, a chance to empower billions and create a truly global economy. But for every token distributed, for every smile captured on camera, there is a lingering tension, an awareness that centralized control of human identity is both a marvel and a risk. Philosophically, the orb challenges us to ask, how much of ourselves are we willing to digitize? How far will society go in exchanging privacy for opportunity, and at what cost? Each World ID is more than a key to a cryptocurrency. It is a symbol of a society balancing innovation with ethics, inclusion with surveillance, and trust with caution. The orb illuminates these choices, literally and figuratively, casting both light and shadow across the human landscape. As we stand on the edge of this digital frontier, one thing is clear. The story of Worldcoin and its orb is far from over. Technology moves faster than legislation. Ambition often outpaces caution, and every decision made today could echo for generations. The orb has become a global symbol of possibility and peril, challenging us to think critically about who we trust, how we prove our humanity, and what freedoms we are willing to surrender in pursuit of progress. If this story has captured your curiosity, imagine what might unfold next. The world is watching, and the orb is still scanning, quietly recording, and shaping the conversation about identity in ways we are only beginning to understand. Comment your thoughts, theories, or experiences with Worldcoin down below. Your perspective could help illuminate the mysteries of this unfolding phenomenon. And don't forget, like this video if it intrigued you, share it with friends to spark the conversation, and subscribe to Black Thread Mysteries for more explorations into the unknown, the unexplained, and the unsettling truths lurking just beneath the surface. The orb may glow, it may record, but the ultimate question remains with us. How far will humanity go into the digital unknown?